Content note. This episode discusses trauma and its psychological impact from an educational, trauma-informed perspective. While the discussion is non-graphic and focuses on storytelling ethics rather than explicit events, the topic may be sensitive for some listeners. Please listen with care and take breaks as needed. Trauma is everywhere in modern storytelling. In fantasy, in horror, in crime, historical fictions, everywhere. But realism doesn't come from being graphic, and intensity doesn't come from being cruel. Today, we're talking about how to write trauma realistically, ethically, and without voyeurism. So your stories feel true without harming your readers or your characters. This is Field Notes from the Dead. I'm Kai Roberts, a forensic anthropology student, and jump in with me. Today we're talking about how to write trauma realistically, ethically, and without voyeurism. Whether you're a novelist, a screenwriter, a world builder, creating entire societies that are shaped by violence. What is trauma, actually? One of the biggest misconceptions in writing is that trauma is the main event. It's not. Trauma is what happens after, when a nervous system is overwhelmed and can't fully process what just occurred. Two characters can experience the exact same event, a battle, an assault, a disaster, and only one of those characters or people may be traumatized. Trauma is individual. That's because trauma is shaped by the loss of control, the fear, the helplessness, and the unpredictability. If you want realism, focus less on what happened and more on how the character's body and behavior start to change afterward. Let's talk realism versus voyeurism. Voyeurism happens when trauma becomes the spectacle. This usually shows up when people let the camera linger too long on pain. The details exist only for shock value, and suffering is used to prove grit. You don't want characters to be reduced to what hurt them. Trauma-informed realism does the opposite. It will prioritize the survivor's internal experience, uses restraint, allows ambiguity, and trusts the reader. Here's a rule of thumb. If the scene feels like it's asking the reader to watch instead of understand, it's probably voyeuristic. So let's talk about how trauma actually shows up. Most trauma survivors will experience fragmentation, confusion, sensory distortion, emotional numbness. So if your pain is only existing to move the plot, but not the person or the character, your readers and your players are going to feel that. Real trauma will show up quietly, in small ways. They're going to also experience things like hypervigilance and avoidance, disassociation, sleeping difficulty. They're going to be irritable sometimes. You might see emotional flatness. You want to see delayed reactions. A character doesn't need flashbacks every chapter. There's not always going to be this big blow up. That's not how trauma works in day-to-day life. It will look like leaving the room, refusing help from your friends, being nervous and laughing at the wrong moment, not remembering what happened in a situation. Those details are going to feel real because they are real. Real trauma survivors experience this. These kind of write-ins will help your reader and your players feel and be able to really get into their characters. Okay, let's do some examples for writers right now. And we're going to do the difference between voyeuristic and trauma-informed. Now, don't get me wrong, there are some stories that need voyeurism, but let's go over what the difference would be. Voyeuristic approach would be detailed blow-by-blow violence, sensory overload without emotional grounding of the character. Trauma will appear once and then it's just gone. It just disappears. The pain only exists to motivate another character. Those are voyeuristic. Let's do some trauma-informed approaches. The event may be brief or partially obscured. Focus on the confusion, the distortion, or the silence. the aftermath will linger in the behaviors of the character, and the character's choices may change. Their personality will go through an upload of some kinds where it starts to change. It will modulize. So, for example, instead of describing every strike in a battle, you might show a character flinching at raised voice weeks later. They have trouble sleeping. They may have a refusal to remove their armor, whether that armor be an emotional guard or physical armor. There'll be anger that's misplaced. Readers believe trauma that echoes. Let's do some examples for our world builders. Trauma at the societal level. Now let's talk straight to my world builders. Trauma doesn't just shape individuals, it shapes cultures. Ask yourself, what events scarred the society? War, plague, collapse, colonization? Who survived and who didn't? Those are really important details. Trauma-informed world building shows up as strict rituals around safety, distrust of outsiders, heavy emphasis on traditions within the village, communal caregiving to the point that it's scary, taboos that don't make logical sense at first. A traumatized society doesn't need to be grim and dark and ashes floating through the air. It might be hyper-orderly, overly gentle, obsessed with rules, deeply ritualistic. These are survival strategies and not flaws. These really happen, and they'll really help connect your players to the world that they're walking into. Agency matters. One of the most important questions you can ask is, who has agency here? Trauma-informed writing will center the survivor's perspective, avoid stripping the character of choices, shows coping and not just the damage. Healing doesn't just mean forgetting, it means adaptation. Characters can be changed and undergo growth after long periods of traumatic coping. They can be changed without being completely broken. Let's talk about our consequences, care, and our context. Trauma exists within real-world systems. So ask yourself, who's supporting the character that the trauma is surrounding? Who's failing them? What resources exist or don't? Highlight those. Show that kind of detail. A character's response to trauma can be shaped by community, power, safety, belief systems. Writing this context will make trauma feel real and humane. Those are deeply important details to help your character highlight their growth and the struggles they went through. Remember, trauma, you don't just get it over with. You can't look at your character and be like, and they were done with it. They decided that the trauma was no longer going to bother them, and so it didn't. That's not how it works in the real world, and that will not allow your readers to connect with your character. Allow your character growth. So why does any of this matter? When writers handle trauma with care, something really powerful happens. Readers will feel seen and not exploited. Realism doesn't come from graphic details. It comes from empathy, restraint, and respect. If you're writing about pain, do it with strong intention. You're not just telling a story, you're holding somebody's attention and sometimes their lived experiences. Thanks for exploring trauma tips for writers and world builders and screenwriters and anybody that wants to understand trauma without voyeurism or knowing the difference between the two. I am Kai Roberts, and this is Field Notes from the Dead. Please comment, share, like, follow, all of the buttons, all of the things, and let me know if you want longer episodes, shorter episodes, episode minis, and whatever you might want to hear. Thanks so much. Have a great night.